Good morning. Thank you very much for coming for this session. My name is Memory Ngui, and I'll be taking you through this session together with Douglas Jomuya. Please confirm you can hear me. Muta, if you can confirm if you can hear me.
Yes, sir, I can hear you.
Thank you very much. So keep admitting the people. We had 160 people registered. Hopefully we'll get more than half of that. Thank you. So just as an introduction, I said my name is Memory Ngui. I'm an occupational psychologist, and I am the managing consultant of Industrial Psychology Consultants. My background is purely psychology. I studied at the University of Zimbabwe. Both my first degree and master's degree, I did those at the University of Zimbabwe. At the time that I did my master, in between my masters, I did an occupational psychology diploma, which was an equivalent of a master's degree that time, because we had no master's degree in occupational psychology at that particular time. We were the first pioneers to do the master's degree program. Myself, Dr. Pfungwa Dliwayo, Dr. Narire, and I think Masha was on the occupational psychology one, but the actual master's program and Angeline from Old Mutual. Those were the people that were really on that master's program, the first one. I understand the University of Zimbabwe has got the program running now. The major challenge has been obviously the issue of getting enough staff to run the program, given the strict requirements for that particular program. I do have Mr. Jomuya in the house. Mr. Jomuya, are you in?
Yes, I am.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Jomuya is an occupational psychologist. I do work with him more frequently. Mr. Jomuya was actually my lecturer in the master's program through the 2 years of the master's program, and also he was my supervisor for my dissertation for my master's program. He is currently teaching at the University of Zimbabwe, both undergrad and master's programs in the same area of occupational psychology. So he's coming in handy to answer any other question that you may have. As I go through the presentation, I'll also call on him to come in to help us in answering some of the questions, if we do have any question that may have. I know there are quite a number of psychologists who have joined. I know Sfelan is joining just now, he's in the waiting room, and many other psychologists. I think Jacqueline, I saw someone there, many other psychologists who are here. Some are not specifically from the occupational side, but there are also psychologists in the other fields of psychology. The topic for today is psychometric tests, and the reason why we are doing this psychometric testing presentation is that I have received quite a number of requests from people who wanted to understand what is involved in psychometric tests, what are they, who can do psychometric tests, and all those things. There are misconceptions in some spheres, but I do understand that the majority of the people have got a very good appreciation of the psychometric testing field. So before I go into the actual presentation, I just want to highlight that, yes, for you to be able to administer psychometric tests in this country, you need to be a registered psychologist. And the process for you to be registered as an occupational or any other field of psychology is that you must have a first degree in psychology. And after first degree, you must possess a master's degree in psychology. After that, you go through a one-year supervised internship. After that, the regulator will then assess you almost a qualifying kind of exam. The regulator is Allied Health Professions Council. Previously, an Allied Health Professions Council is under the Ministry of Health. So all psychologists are managed under the Ministry of Health in terms of from a regulatory point of view. Long back, we used to have the Zimbabwe Psychological Practice Act. It was repealed some years back for various reasons, but psychologists are trying to revive that act so that we have a specific act. Currently, we are covered under the Allied Health Professions under the Ministry of Health. For those that are interested, Allied Health is very welcoming. You can actually visit them, find out if you want to be a psychologist, what is the process. But just like lawyers, for you to be a lawyer, you must have studied law, and they've got their own requirements for registering you to practice as a lawyer. Just for psychologists, once you have done your first degree, a second degree, your master's degree, then your internship, a full year, 1 year internship, You then can go through the assessment that are done post internship. If you pass those, you are registered as a psychologist. You are given what is called a practicing certificate, a registration certificate first. The registration certificate does not have limit of time. What has got limit of time is a practicing certificate, which is renewed every year. So just like now, psychologists will be busy renewing their practicing certificates once the tariffs are out. What is currently out, not there is the regulator is still working on the tariffs as soon as Monday when I checked, when my team checked with them. So once the tariffs are out, we expect that all psychologists who are registered will be able to get their practicing certificates. The reason why they do the practicing certificate every year is because you need then to have every year you are required to have a certain number of CPD points for you to qualify to be registered, and also that you have no records that are putting the field of psychology obviously into disrepute. Then you can be registered by the regulator, and all the information is available. I also want to mention that we do have the Zimbabwe Psychological Association, which I am a council member. I was the president of that association before. Last year I was not in the council. This year I'm in the council. When you look at that council, that association is really a grouping of professional psychologists, including those that are actually not psychologists, but we have studied psychology, and even other affiliate professions who want to learn about psychology or understand what happened in psychology. They've got various membership programs, but for you to then be able to vote in the elections, you need to be a fully registered psychologist. So that association is a professional association that lobbies for whatever developments we want as psychologists. They also assist people in terms of actual holding development sessions. I did present a similar session to that grouping, but this session will be slightly different in the sense that I'm presenting majority to non-psychologists. So I've tried to modify it to suit the target audience. So that's basically in terms of the professional background that is required. I did receive quite a number of inquiries from people who have done human resources who want to join and do psychology. The best route is that you must study psychology even after your first degree in HR or business studies or BA or religious studies. You can still go and study psychology, but the process that is very long because you have to do your 3-year degree or a 4-year degree. After that, you do your master's, the minimum of 2 years to complete your master's. After that, you need another year for your internship, roughly about 7 years for you to be able to qualify as a practicing psychologist. Just to emphasize that is the practice everywhere globally. Any country that you go to, psychologists are all regulated by various statutes. And some fall under the Ministry of Health, some don't fall under the Ministry of Health. In some countries, self-regulatory, but all of them are supported by statutes. The bigger driver of that particular thrust is that psychologists deal with sensitive human issues that they thought, if not handled properly, can destroy someone's life, can affect a lot of people. So that's why they've got those guidelines. Just for your information, for those that would like to read, one of the best areas to get information, especially on the occupational side, is to read information around the Society of Industrial and Organizational Psychology, the CIOP. It's an international organization, predominantly American, but it's global. But they've got all the standards that you can think of about testing, about anything to do with occupational psychology, validation of tests, reliability of tests, and all those things. It's rich. I do have lots of material on that. I have worked with some of the guys who are in the CEOP leadership in some of my projects, which are not normally in this country, but as part of a project team working outside the country. And for those that would want more information, we can share that information. So I take this platform as a part of sharing information, and also that will give you an opportunity to ask any question that you may have about either the practice of psychology or psychometric testing in general. And psychometric test is not the only branch of psychology, although all psychologists do use psychometric tests in their work. So when you look now at psychometric testing or psychometrics, that's what I want to go to now. It's really an issue of measurement of psychological traits or variables, and every division of psychology does have this particular branch of psychology. It's a measurement, as it is the score of psychological practice in psychology. Psychologists are scientists, therefore they are required to make sure that whatever solution they prescribe is based on evidence, especially if you look at people who are in clinical or forensic psychology. They do use these things a lot. Imagine if someone is in clinical psychology, they assess you that you've got a depression or you're stressed when they don't have enough evidence for that particular assessment. It can lead to wrong diagnostics and also to wrong solutions. So just like what doctors do, if you go to a doctor, you're sick, they take your temperature, they do all sorts of things on you before they prescribe a solution. It's done deliberately in order to make sure that the solutions that come out of that are solid and things like that. So if you will see that the first part of my presentation is really just going into the bit of theoretical and the framework. Then after that, I'll go to a section where I talk about application. Then I talk about day-to-day things that you know or want to know about psychometric tests. But I thought it was important for me to start by looking at psychometric tests from this particular point. In psychology, for those that have done psychometric tests, I'm sure you might have come across what is called classical test theory, which is the basis of what we now refer to as psychometric testing. At the core of classical test theory is the concept of reliability and validity. If you've got any instrument in psychology that you're using or doing psychometric tests and the instrument is not reliable, you must not use it. If the instrument is not valid, you must not use it, because whatever outcome comes out of that particular instrument is useless. And also, just for you to take note that you can have a reliable instrument, but an invalid instrument. And I will explain what that means in practice. Just to focus on the reliability, for example, though I'll talk about shortly, when something is reliable, it means it gives you a consistent score when you do repeated measures of the same concept. For example, you go at a pharmacy, they've got a scale to weigh your weight, and you go at 8 o'clock in the morning, it says you're 95 kgs. You go in the afternoon at 11, it says you're 140. You go there in the afternoon around 3, it says you are 26 kgs. It means that instrument is not reliable. That's basically what you're talking about. Because in psychology, most of the things that we measure, especially in the occupational psychology, things like your general mental ability, which is called GMA, are all very stable traits, or your personality, they're very stable. Yes, some people say there are changes, but there's two arguments in terms of whether those things change or not, and at what stage do they change. And we expect that if we test you today on a test of verbal reasoning, we expect you to score in the same range when we test you next week, when we test you a month later, when we test you 4 months down the line, to show that the test is reliable. But if the test is not reliable, it will give us different scores, which will probably fall in the different ranges. Then validity is basically in occupational psychology, we're mostly interested in, maybe I would say 3 types of validity. The first one is obviously predictive validity, whether the test that you're using is predicting what you say. If you're giving a test and says it predicts someone's performance, it must be able to have a very high correlation with performance. That's what is called predictive validity. Then we are also interested in what is called construct validity. Construct validity. If you are measuring a personality trait called extroversion or neuroticism, we want to be able to see if the test that you are using, that instrument is properly represented in your instrument that you're using. That is what is called construct validity. We also talk about content validity, but I think for us, the bigger ones are really the predictive validity for practice purposes and also content validity. All the other kind of validities all feed into predictive validity because we want to predict something. So if you look at classical test theory, it's basically one way of linking your observed score on a test or on an instrument to an observed entity that you are hopefully measuring. That's what is important. For example, a person who scores high on English language usage ordinarily should have high English language knowledge. That's what you're saying. If you are getting 90%, 100% on English language, we're assuming that you will have higher English language knowledge. Or usage. So in classical test theory, as you can see there, we've got x equals to t plus e. I won't bother you with the maths, but it's important for you to highlight this. The x is the observed score, which means what you have scored on your test, and the t is the true score, and the e is what we call a random error. So in every measurement, there is random error, and what you're trying to do when you're measuring psychometric tests is to reduce random error. And that random error, that's why you find when you look at reliability, you may find the test is 0.7 reliability, which means there's an unexplained variance of about 30%, which could be random error, and any instrument that you use has got this kind of random error. The focus of psychometric test, and for those that are in psychometric testing, is for you to reduce the amount of random error in your instrument, because the more random error you have, the less reliable your instrument is. Okay, so I will not focus on that. So reliability, I've already talked about that. I will not waste a lot of time on the reliability of the instrument. I think I gave a very good example there on the reliability of the instrument. Okay, test, retest, I talk validity. What matters most for people in occupational psychology is that the test must be valid. And there have been arguments on WhatsApp, on LinkedIn, on Twitter. Some people say, is this test valid or not? Yes, tests are valid, and there are ways of doing validation studies, as I will show you just now. So as outlined by Ken 22006, scale validation can be characterized by 3 key principles. One is the theory underlying the instrument and what it measures must precede an assessment of test score validity. Validation involves a directed program of research and not a single study. Competing theories as to the behavior of the measure must be considered. For example, when you are validating, if you are going to validate your test, you must make sure that whatever concept you are measuring is really solid from a reliability point of view. Okay, I've already summarized the issue to do with predictive validity, but I can come back to these issues. When you're doing constructive validation, for those in occupational psychology and other fields of psychology, this is very important for you to take note. When a test comes to Zimbabwe, for example, we buy a test from the UK, from America, from wherever country we buy a test. The first thing that you do is you do a sample, or you administer that test to a sample of people, and you do what is called a construct validation. Because from one culture to the other, you may find the person who designed the test was looking at things that people don't understand in this part of the world. So the best way is to see if the test constructs of the test, the variables that you are measuring, but that particular test are stable in this particular environment, in our Zimbabwe environment. That is very important. Mr. Jomuya, maybe you can come in here to help in terms of explaining the importance of construct validation.
Thank you, Memory. I think you've touched on the main issues, but just to add that each culture defines any of these traits or constructs differently, depending, of course, on the experiences in that particular culture. And often there are basically 3 types of biases or the errors that may arise in our measurement of a foreign test. One, as you have mentioned, is the construct validity. Does the construct of extraversion carry the same meaning in the UK and in Zimbabwe? What you will find is that there will be certain differences. Whereas in the UK, you can be very active, playful, and so forth. Here, we would call it agajangan, which is not part of the construct as it is understood, say, in the UK. So that's one element. Other element is that of the administration itself, the language in which the test is. Some of the words may not carry the same meaning across different cultures. So those are issues that need to be addressed. So 3, I've mentioned about the construct, and then the issue of item equivalence. Are they the same thing? And then also the method, which is how you actually go about administering the test. So on that, there are many issues that you need to consider when you're validating a foreign test. Over to you, Memory.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jomuya, for that clarification. And just for any information, this is the work that I normally do with Mr. Jomuya to make sure that the tests are actually customized for our own environment. For those that want to read, especially those in the occupational psychology or even as an HR professional, you are dealing with a lot of stress issues. We did validate what is called the 4DSQ, which is an instrument that is used to measure stress in the work setting. It was first developed in the Netherlands. We actually administered here to over 900 people, and we did a validation using both exploratory and confirmatory effect analysis. That paper is published in a peer-reviewed journal. If you look for Douglas Omuya and Memory Ngui, that paper is actually a peer-reviewed paper that you can look at and see. If you read that paper, you see the methodology that we follow. That's what we do for all the instruments. We have got other papers that are waiting to be published that we have done, especially on the validation of the instruments. And we did another one on the same for DSQ using more predominantly a Zambian sample. So that paper is about to be published. Then for most people, the biggest or the most important part that they're interested in is how do you interpret the test scores that someone gets. Although I'll contextualize this as we go when we go into the actual work situation. So the scores are in most cases the final output of an assessment, whether in clinical psychology or in occupational forensic psychology or in community psychology. The ultimate score is often associated with the total number of correct items that a person gets. For example, you may find that when you write a test that is out of 40, you get 35 out of 40, which means you've got scored 88%. In straightforward interpretation, it means you've done extremely well. But this raw score to us as psychologists means nothing if it's not interpreted correctly. So you can get 88. What does that mean? John has got 88% on a verbal reasoning test. What exactly does that mean? Does it mean they've done well? Does it mean they're very good in verbal reasoning? Does it mean that if it's numerical reasoning, does it mean they're very good in numerical reasoning? At face value, yes. But in true interpretation of that particular test, we don't know whether this person is actually very good or not until we go to the way tests are interpreted in psychology. So the score is more meaningful when you check the test taker's performance relative to what is called a comparison group. And this comparison group is what we call a norm group. It's a norm group is a group of similar people at the same level. For example, you may find that that 35 out of 40 on verbal reasoning, if I compare this score to people who are in the UK who are of English origin, this person may be last in a group of 1,000. If I compare to 1,000 people who have taken the same test, and this person with their 35 out of 40, they are the last in that kind of ranking, because the average is 39, which means they're quite way below average. Okay, I come to the same score, I come to the Zimbabwean situation, and I find that this person has done very well. The average is 15. And this person is actually ranked 90th percentile, for example. They're in the top 10% of that particular test. So whenever, I want you to understand this, whenever a test score is given, the interpretation depends on the norm group, and that's the standards across the globe. You have to depend on what is called a norm group. A raw score on its own is meaningful, it's meaningless. For example, when I test HR people, we categorize and say, what level are these people? Is this an HR director level? Is it a business partner level? Or HR executive level? Is it an HR officer level? Is it an HR assistant level? Is it a clerical level? So we may have 5 levels. So this score, the same person who takes this 35 score, their performance will vary by norm group. They may do very well at clerical level when you compare them to HR clerks. When you go up and then go to business partner level, you find they're the last, they're in the 25th, which means they're in the bottom 25. Or when you go to HR director level, you find that they're the last, they're the bottom, at the bottom. Basically not even better than 10% of the people in the 1,000 norm sample, okay, of a Zimbabwean situation. So in designing that norm group, it's also important for you to understand that the norm group must be, normally we recommend, if you're doing tests in Zimbabwe, you must have a national norm group that is representative of Zimbabweans. If you are testing in Africa like we do, we have got norm groups, especially for Southern Africa, we do have those covering most of the Southern African countries. The average of those scores are different. That's why it's important to look at those norm groups. So the averages are different. For example, if someone in the UK gives you a test here and they compare it to UK norms, they actually can give you misleading results. Because remember, the norm group, the purpose of a norm group is just saying, how competitive is your score when you compare it to people at the same level? Okay, how competitive are you when you compare to people at the same level? Just for example, if I would give you another example, you're in a race, we take, I know brains, you're here, we take you and say, okay, my brother, you are going for a race running 100 meters. We are going to pair you with people in the class of, what is that Jamaican name? What is the name, by the way, the Jamaican fast runner? Those in sports.
Bolt.
Bolt, Usain Bolt, yeah. And the equivalent of Usain Bolt. It's very likely you may come last out of that group, okay? Or you may come good. But if I take and say, look, let me take a few guys, HR guys, and we are going for a race, Brain can come out as the top person, the number one. So the comparison group is important. You can fail, you can be considered to have failed the test simply because the person doing the test has used the wrong comparison group. So norming of test is a standard that anyone who is doing psychometric tests must be able to understand what is a norm group, how do I classify norm groups, how do I calculate norms and things like that. So it's important. So no score in psychology is interpreted as a raw score. It's interpreted in terms of the norm group. In Zimbabwe, most of the time, it's either we are using your percentiles, which are easy to understand. For those that normally don't like to do lots of calculations, the percentile ranking is the easiest to use. If you look at this particular graph, this is the percentile scores. So if someone scores in the 99th percentile of any particular group, which means they're in the top 1%, they are really top notch. If someone scores in the 10th percentile, which means they're in the bottom 10 of that particular group. So every score is put into this. Your score, we come and say, okay, this is the distribution of our norm group scores. What would be a score of 40 represent? We may find 40 actually represent a percentile score of 80 or 85. You've done well. So that's how we interpret every test score. I hope we understand there. So we're not going to look at, some people write psychometric test and then say, under row, check. But you don't know which norm group you are going to be compared with. Or if you know, if you are writing for an executive level, you must know you're going to be compared with other executives. Sometimes not necessarily other executives in HR, because you're not going to work alone. If you're going to be an HR director, it means you're going to talk to a finance director, you're going to be interacting with the marketing director, you're going to be interacting with the operations director. Sometimes we compare you with those people so that we know how competitive are you if we were to put you in that group. As we discuss in the meetings, in the executive meetings, are you going to be competitive and understand what they're going to be saying? So we compare you to that norm group. So norm groups, there are various norm groups that we have, and we choose. Sometimes the client can tell you, I want this person compared to HR professionals alone. I want this person compared to other executives who require the same level of thinking. So those are the kind of things that we look at. So besides percentiles, you can also use standard scores, which involve the transformation of your raw score into a standard score, basically using your mean and standard deviation. And a lot of people don't understand what IQ means. IQ is just a standard score, and it has got a mean of 100 and a standard deviation of 15. That's the IQ score. So that's why you'll find, if you look at people like Mark Zuckerberg, they've got IQ scores above 140, which is called a range of a genius. After 140, and if you ever take an IQ score, pure IQ score, you just watch this. If your score is below 800, it means your IQ score is below average. But again, it depends on the norm group. Are you comparing me to British people? Are you comparing me to Americans? Are you comparing me to Singaporeans, who are probably the highest rated in terms of IQ? Those are questions that you must ask, and they need to be contextualized. We also use standard scores like Z scores, IQ scores, and T scores. For example, the T score is the one that you normally use to calculate your average score. That's what we normally use, your T score. They give you exactly the same interpretation, but they've got different qualities, but they all give you the same interpretation. This is the conversion table if you want to convert percentile rankings, for example, to standard stains or T scores or standard Z scores. This is what you use, but there are tables that you use direct conversion, which is almost like your mathematical table that you can use to do that. Test bias, Mr. Zumia talked about test bias. For example, you may find you go and write a numerical reasoning test, which is basically your maths, and you find Asians are scoring roughly around 38. This is the raw score. Africans are scoring 23. White are scoring 37. Okay, so if you then take my African score and compare me to Asians, it's very likely I may be in the bottom quarter, okay, or in the bottom 25%. You compare me to To white people, I may be slightly competitive, but again, still below the 50th percentile or below the median of 50. But if you compare me to Africans, I may be the best in the African group. So all tests do get contextualized within this kind of framework, within what is called a norm group. Let's now look at application of tests in the work situation, which is, I think, most people are interested in. Then at the end, I will then talk about you taking the psychometric test, what is involved, what do you need to know? What makes someone perform in a particular job? If people can put in the chat room, what do you think? Why? Just put in the chat room. I just want to find out why. What do you think drives performance of an individual in a job from your experience? What do you think drives performance of an individual? Just list. What do you think? Let's just list randomly, whatever you think, whatever. We are tapping into your experience either as an HR professional or as an individual working in an organization. What exactly do you think really drives the performance of the individual? Okay. I can see experience, level of education, keep them coming, mental ability, keep them coming, good communication, keep them coming. I just want to see cognitive ability, experience, emotional intelligence, I think EQ, yes. Then environment, very person job fit, remuneration, attitude, motivation, continuous development, keep them coming. Though we want them, keep them coming. Okay, so you can see the continuous development, intrinsic motivation, commitment, all this job fit, you are all right. They have some form of contribution to performance. But the question is what contributes more, and we will get into that. Okay, but I also want you to ask you. I want also to ask you a question that I want you to respond in the chat room. But have you seen that you can hire someone who meets all the qualifications that you require, including more, who has got all the experience that you require for that job, minimum experience, even more, and still they don't perform? Have you met people like that? Just put a yes or a no. Okay, just put a yes or a no. Okay, I can see yes. We will explain why that happens. Thank you for that. We will explain why that kind of situation happens. So people who are qualified, they meet all the qualifications, the experience requirements of a job, but they still fail to perform. These are issues that are possible. So what psychometric tests cannot measure, and we must come out upfront with this. I know if you can meet yourself, there's someone talking, if you can meet yourself. Okay, so what psychometrics cannot measure, although we do design tests to measure this, but in general, your normal psychometric testing does not measure job knowledge. The assumption is that the person has got the job knowledge. And in most cases, we actually use knowledge, we use experience and the qualification to be a proxy for job knowledge, which is actually misleading, as I will show you. So we tend to infer capacity to learn and acquire job knowledge from general mental ability, but we don't measure job knowledge. For example, if I test someone there and someone wants to hire them and say, look, can you test this person? They are going to a level, an HR business partner. I don't know whether they've got the degree. I don't know whether they've got a degree in HR or anything else, or they've done chemistry, they've done engineering, but they want them to reason at the level of an HR business partner. Yes, we test them. And they may pass with flying colors, say, look, their reasoning capacity is enough for them to acquire the knowledge. Their reasoning capacity is enough for them to be able to learn, and with sufficient knowledge, they are able to deliver on this particular job, everything, holding everything constant. Okay? Psychometric tests do not measure competence directly, especially when you look at your general mental ability tests and personality, although these can be inferred. But there are other branches of psychometric tests which are not very common in Zimbabwe, but we use them more frequently ourselves, which is assessment centers. Assessment centers are simulations, and they measure things like your competencies. In assessment centers, we use role plays, we use presentations, we use what is called an in-tray or in-basket, we use what is called a leaders group discussion. This is where we actually design something customized to suit a particular role, and these are simulations. We do that, and it's part of psychometric testing. So your general mental ability and personality, predominantly, they don't measure those. But if you want to go and measure competencies, we use assessment centers. Sometimes, if you don't have time for assessment centers, we can use a 360-degree assessment. You also use to measure the same competencies. That's what we do if you want to measure that. We also design what are called job knowledge tests. It's all part of assessment of psychometric testing. So it depends. The cheaper ones, normally it's your general mental ability and assessing the personality and emotional intelligence of the individual. Those are the easiest. The more difficult, the more expensive ones are your assessment centers, where you want to measure your competencies. And also what is called the situational judgment tests, where you want to measure job knowledge. Those are more expensive and they are really hard and tough to design. We have designed some ourselves with Mr. Jumuya, depending on the situation. We actually currently have a very complex assessment in basket exercises for both CEOs, specifically for CEOs, and also specifically for senior executives and middle managers. So one thing that before the application of psychometric tests to any job situation, you need to know these things. Jobs vary in their level of complexity. An engineer's job is more complex than an artisan. It's a given. The chief finance officer's role is more complex than that of an accounts clerk. It's a given. So in order to select capable people or staff, you need to know the various level of work complexity before you do anything. And we as psychologists, because there's something that is called occupational aptitude patterns map for those that want to read. Occupational aptitude patterns map that classifies all jobs and the required level of aptitude required in terms of the general mental ability. It's available. It's Godfreyson. I think we did that research long back. It's a Bible for most people in occupational psychology. So all jobs can actually be put into stratas like this in terms of level of complexity. As you go up, that's the change in level of complexity. So the level of complexity is the one that we use to say, what test do we give in this particular type of level of role? Normally, in some cases, yes, we used to look at your job family and specifically look at the kind of job, but we also just classify them in terms of the level of complexity, already classified in terms of research done. Now that we've got a fair understanding of the level of complexity, we can now look at the capacity of employees to handle that level of complexity. That's where we come in as psychologists to do psychometric testing. Some people are capable of handling more complex work than others, and it's a fact of life. And let's emphasize, let's say we have got 100 HR business partner level HR professionals in this particular, in Harare. They all don't perform at the same level. They all don't have the same capacity for the same role. They all have the same title, HR business partner. They don't have the same capacity. And it's a fact of life. It's individual differences. And it's across all other facets of life. We are all not the same. But psychologists' interest is to identify those individual differences and deploy people based on their capacity. Okay, so if someone doesn't have currently have the ability to handle complexity at the level required of a certain position, according to Jacques, who is actually the author of these levels of work for those that want to read, he wrote lots of books, very interesting books. He says no amount of training, coaching, or personal will change that, and we'll deal with that as we go. Let's look at selection procedures or methods or predictors that actually predict performance. If you look there, if you look at GMA, which is a general mental ability, GMA in our context, we are basically looking at three tests: verbal reasoning, abstract reasoning, and numerical reasoning as a composite. That's what we are calling GMA. So your overall performance on those three tests, you can have someone who's very good in numerical reasoning, very poor in verbal reasoning, and very poor in abstract reasoning, but they can still score above average when it comes to GMA. So GMA has got a predictive power of about 65%, what we call operational validity. So holding everything else constant. I'm sure if you know and you understand science, you will know that when you are looking at the impact of any particular factor, we hold the other factors constant. What it means is that if you were to take someone and they are recruiting HR business partners today, and we say we hold the culture of the organization that they're going into constant, we hold the issue to do with money constant, we hold the people that they're going to work with constant, GMA will be able to predict 65% of the variation in performance, which is very powerful. Okay, and the rest can be predicted by other factors. It could be environment, it could be culture, it could be experience, it could be others. Then the next predictor is basically the interview. This is actually a process, the interview. The interview is very predictive, but there is a proviso to this. This is a structured interview. Most of the interviews that we are seeing in practice are actually not structured. Why am I saying so? In a structured interview, you design interview questions based on what are called KSOs, okay? Knowledge, skills, abilities, and other characteristics. And you, in each job, you go and look at that. If you go to a website called ONET, just look at how they do it. It's a website owned by Society for Industrial and Organizational Psychology. They produce that every year and update any job description that you want. If you want to really know what are the characteristics required for in this particular job in terms of the person, go and look at that website. It's called ONET. ONET. You just go and Google human resource manager and print out the job profile that comes out of there. That's what those job profiles that are produced by psychologists. But the form of job analysis that we do when we are preparing to test someone, they are different from a job analysis that you use when you're doing job evaluation and other things. Completely different. So look at that. So in a structured interview, you ask every candidate the same question, if preferably in the same way. You don't introduce anything that is not standard or that has not been asked in other candidates. You use exactly the same questions throughout. There's a structured marking scheme. Before you go into the interview, this question, these are the expected answers for each question, so that the marking, the reliability of that interview can be improved. Without that, with most of the unstructured interviews where you get into an interview, someone says, are you married? Do you have kids? Where do you come from? Which school do you go to? And things, useless questions, some of the questions that we ask in the interviews. When you do that, you introduce what is called unstructured interviews, and the reliability of those go down and significantly affect the operational validity of those interviews. When you look at Adam Grant and others, including John Sullivan, they have actually called the unstructured interview a useless tool. Because they said it's just like tossing a coin. It's as good as saying, randomly pick them. Then peer ratings, I'll just pick a few. Job knowledge tests, you can see 46%. Integrity tests, 46%. What is of interest there? Personality-based emotional intelligence, 32%. Reference checks, 26%. Situational judgment tests, which are actually measure job knowledge as well, 26%. Then I wanted to come to the left side. On the left side from the bottom, you find age predicts a performance, zero correlation with performance when you look at age. Yeah, obviously here we're excluding physical work, like we're going to the army and things like that. Then graphology, 2%. Openness to experience is a trait in personality. Agreeableness, extraversion. Years of education, only 10%. Job experience, only 16%. This is why you find that a person who has got the requisite experience, the requisite education, can still fail to perform, because the predictive power of years of education and years of experience is small. When combined, it's 26%, holding other factors constant, okay? And this, for you to understand and appreciate this, you must also appreciate if you believe in scientific research. And this is an output of what is called meta-analysis, which is a combination, amalgamation of a number of research that has been done in the area of predicting performance of employees. Then, for example, let's say you want then to combine psychometric tests, which is the GMA, you want to combine it and other instruments. If you start by testing those people and you then do an interview, for example, interview only add an extra 18%, okay? Integrity will add 20%, interest 10%, conscientiousness, which is a trait in the big 5 personality traits, will add 8% if you've done psychometric testing in terms of general mental ability. And conscientiousness is the biggest predictor of performance across all jobs, out of all the personality traits that you can think of. So that's the addition. If you come to age, again, 0. Job knowledge test will add 0 if you've already done GMA, peer ratings, and all the other things there. So that's basically the background there in terms of what actually predicts performance and why sometimes you can hire someone and you find that they are not performing. And I also want to emphasize that psychometric tests are not mandatory. An organization can choose. You guys are HR professionals. You can actually choose not to use them, and no one will force you. But it's like someone who is doing farming, and they know if it comes to time of harvesting. If I get people from the community, I normally do 2 tons of maize harvesting per day. But if I use a combined harvest, I can actually do 20 tons or 50 tons a day. The choice is basically yours. If the psychometric test doesn't work in your situation, there's no need for you to use them. If it's working in your situation, use them. And that's perfectly fine. If you go back to the America, for example, if you look at all the listed companies, I was trying to average the average usage of psychometric tests for listed companies for all the stock exchanges in America. The average is about 75% of all the listed companies in America use psychometric testing to recruit either throughout all the professional levels or all levels, in some cases, a particular category of employees. In some cases, the issue of cost and other things do drive that. So the common cognitive tests that we use are verbal reasoning, numerical reasoning, abstract reasoning. Those first three are called general mental ability. So verbal reasoning is not your ability to speak English, it's the logic in what you write and say. This is why you find you can bring in someone, interview them, they are really they speak well English, but you give them something to write or present, you find it's mumbo jumbo, it's mixed up. There's no logic in them, which means they've got very low verbal reasoning. One is they've got very good language usage, which we actually test. If you want us to test language usage, there's a separate test, but for employment purposes, we normally don't test English language usage, but we are doing career guidance, we do test English language usage. So if you want us to test your English language usage, we can do that, but you don't confuse English language usage with verbal reasoning. Verbal reasoning is the logic in what you write and say. Numerical reasoning, basically you met quantitative reasoning, and some people say, there is a reasoning behind that test. It's not meant to test your mathematical knowledge. It's not meant to test your mathematical knowledge. That's why sometimes those tests, you can't really prepare for them in a sense. To say, now I'm going to read maths today because I'm writing numerical reasoning tomorrow. It won't help you. But psychometric tests, by their nature, they don't test accumulated knowledge. They test natural knowledge. They don't test accumulated knowledge. Then abstract reasoning is a non-verbal reasoning test. Others call it a measure of raw intelligence. There's no text there. It's just shapes, and it measures abstract reasoning. People who score very high in abstract reasoning, they either go into sciences, they're very good at sciences, or their reasoning ability is extremely high. They can put things together, one and two together, even if things are not clear. And abstract reasoning is also related to critical thinking. Critical thinking is very critical in every role. We expect that anyone who goes into a managerial role, even if I would take out all the other three tests, at least get someone with good critical thinking. They will do something better for your organization. Okay? Then when it comes to personality, we use what is called the CPA and the EXAC. I know my other colleagues use the 16PF. They all come to the same conclusion. Both they're all dependent on the big five personality tests. Okay, which is basically your conscientiousness, your neuroticism, openness to experience, extraversion. Your neuroticism is basically what others call emotionality and adjustment. Conscientiousness is basically diligence. Is the person organized? Do they plan their work ahead of time? And do they wait to be told what to do? Highly conscientious people are very diligent. They do their work. They don't need to be followed up and things like that. So sometimes you can get someone who is very intelligent. They've passed their general mental ability test with flying colors, average around. On average, they're around 98%. But you find when it comes to conscientiousness, they score about 15%, which means they are very lazy. That person is very lazy. They're clever, but lazy. They are still not going to deliver. And you can also find a person who is highly neurotic, which means they're emotionally unstable. They are very angry. They get very angry quickly. They've got episodic mood swings. In the morning, they were happy. 2 hours later, they're angry. They're already fighting with someone. They're very aggressive. All these are factors that affect performance. So even if someone is intelligent with a bad personality, sometimes they can fail. Let's look at an example here. I've got James here. James' target job is James applied for an HR director role for a particular company. And in terms of our norm group, we classify this as a senior Zimbabwean executive norm group. So James gets all these tests except critical thinking out of 40, and critical thinking is out of 60. So verbal reasoning, James gets a raw score of 28, the numerical reasoning of 15, abstract reasoning of 26, critical thinking of 18. You can see the percentiles are very high. It depends on the norm group. So when you compare James to that particular norm group, you can see on verbal reasoning, very good, which means James is likely to be very good in terms of presentation, the logic in his presentation, but he is slightly above average on numerical reasoning, which means if you give them complex calculations, they will struggle. Then abstract reasoning, 71 percentile, critical thinking, 85%. This person If there's no one else better than them, it's likely they are likely to be invited for an interview and then probably hired. If not hired, there could be other reasons. Then we take James. I remember I started with the HR director. I'm now going to the same James has now applied for HR business partner, which is the level below. But we are saying, oh no, James took the test about 3 weeks ago. We are not going to retest James. We are using exactly the same scores, but we are changing the norm group that we are using for James. We are now comparing James with a slightly lower role. You can see his 28 is now 85 from 78 on verbal reasoning. His numerical reasoning is now 78 from 55. Okay, because this is a lower role. The absolute reasoning is now 90 from 71, because you're comparing with less competitive, probably less thinking required for that level. You go to his critical thinking was 85, it's now 95. So I want to re-emphasize again. Yes, you can pass psychometric test in one norm group and considered fail in another norm group, because we are comparing you to a different group. It's possible that someone can pass. For example, someone can come to a PC, they write for a test for a HR director. They are classified in the category of saying maybe they are way below average, so the client does not take them for further to interviews. They go to EPZ, which is another consulting company, or to Harrison. They write now the same tests, but now they're writing for business partner level. Their scores are very unlikely to change. They will probably score within the same range, but their percentile ranking has now changed, because we are now comparing it to a different group. You are no longer running with Usain Bolt. We are now running with the Zunika Makones and Chimkoko, okay? And you are better than them. That's basically what it means, okay? So I want you to understand that don't interpret these roles as face value. Let's take another example. A client sent me candidates, Albert, Norm, Satawanda, Gilbert, Colette, and Milton, to write tests, to write psychometric tests for a role of a business partner. The client does not tell me to take a psychology graduate. These people could have a background. Someone is has got psychology, someone has got HR direct, they did the first degree in HR, someone has a business studies or marketing or engineering. But the role that they're targeting is one, business partner. I don't care about what degree they've done. We don't care about what degree they've done, because the norm group is the one that determines how we interpret them. So we come here and say, okay, these are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 countries that have been brought. And you are part of that group. You have come, you write tests, and the client does not call you for interviews. IPC, test, I pass, I want to select. Tarisa, kwakauya vanhu vari 7 now. Kuzonyora matest. But papa nevanga vari better than you. Tarira Albert verbal reasoning 85, numerical 96, abstract reasoning 90, critical thinking 98. Hakuna employer unozonotora fadzai kuti fadzai anostruggle nokuita mapresentation 25. But some will take numerical reasoning. This role requires a lot of calculations. Fadzai no. And for your own information, we actually put weights depending on the level. If you are going to a commercial group, for example, you're writing, you're going to accounts, there will be more weight on numerical reasoning than verbal reasoning. If you are going to HR, there will be more weight on verbal reasoning than verbal reasoning and critical thinking for you. If you are going into accounts, it will probably require you to have more numerical and abstract reasoning. So there are weights. So yeah, there's no disadvantage to you. We take into consideration that maybe numerical reasoning is not required as much as it will be required in accounts than HR. But other companies will say, I want an all-rounder, a person who's good with verbal reasoning, a person who's good in numerical. Abstract reasoning, yes, it has got low contribution in terms of weight. We always do that, especially for non-STEM professions. Finance, accounts, procurement, HR, marketing, and sales. We weight abstract reasoning differently. Okay, so this is what then happens. You go and write another psychometric, you come again. There's fierce competition. Albert is appearing again. Norm says, maybe Albert has already been taken. There's Norm. It comes in right again. Nomsa is better than Fadzai. Tawanda is better than Fadzai. Gilbert is better than Fadzai. Fadzai fails to go again. He says, our test IPC apasikana one time. But I is Fadzai. Tarisa katruku kombe na wangu wako. Wakati nda na kuchukuru. vanhu wakaenda navo, how competitive are you navanhu? Even taita takupa a HR knowledge test, if you use norm groups, we will interpret it the same way. Tikakombeya Fadzai navamwe vako vakaenda navo kuchikoro vava pasame level now, anogona here industrial relations, anogona zvesaizi yake, asi tikamukombeya nana Muchena anenge ari pasi chaipo, tikamukombeya nana Mucheche ndiye anenge ari last. You understand? So that's how the tests are interpreted. So there is really not to fail as such. The client will choose probably the top 3 to go for interviews. And you work on the test, you don't know which other people are writing the test. You are not going to come along. It's very rare. In order to increase your selection ratio, most companies bring 5 people and above. 5 people and above. In some cases, they bring 10. I know some parastatals bring 20. We tested 20 people. So out of those 20, are you really that competitive? If you are not going to be in the top 5 of that group, it's very likely, even if you pass, for example, Tatora this group, my HR business partner, Tawanda, let's say Gilbert, the client says, no, I just want to interview the top 3, Albert, Norms, and Tawanda. And Gilbert, Tarawanda must score like 90% verbal, the numerical reasoning 50, abstract reasoning 89, and critical thinking 91. Gilbert asks you. Gilbert says, no, yes, you passed. But this time around, there were people who were better than you in that group. That's how the tests are interpreted. So we don't then go and say, you know what, Father has been writing, let's now give you a chance. Because she has been writing. We don't do that. We have no choice to do that. We send this summary to the client will make their decision. There are clients who will say, okay, we've given me this summary, but I had I want to take Father. I said, fair and fine, please go ahead. Some of them will come back and say, but now when you're talking strategic issues, the level of critical thinking is not at the level that we want. Other executives are actually despising the person because they're really not thinking critically. I said, but we told you, this person is only average in critical thinking. But when it then comes to articulating things verbally, they're actually on the bottom 25% to 25%. So it's a choice. You guys are the HR people. Whether you take someone who has been classified as less competitive, the decision is entirely yours. The psychologist has got nothing to do with that. You can actually proceed and take that person. So that's how we interpret this test. And I hope this explanation helps you to understand how we interpret the test. I've already indicated that the key predictor in terms of performance is cognitive ability. Whether you want to believe that or not, it depends on whether you believe in science or not, or research. And when you're doing capacity assessment of individuals, obviously we look at what is called current operating level capacity, which is what this is basically an assigned role. Someone is an HR business partner. But the question is, there are so many people who are HR business partners, HR directors, but who have no capacity for those roles. But because they've one way or the other, they found themselves in that particular role. Maybe the interview was not as discriminative as it should be in terms of identifying the good performers. They end up being the leader in that particular role. It's possible for you to get to that kind of situation. It's very possible to get that kind of situation. But when you're doing your skills audit now, this is where things come out. What is the current actual capacity of the person? That do they have the cognitive ability for this particular role? If not, the areas of deficiency can they be addressed? So we look at all these capacities. So if you look at Jacquet, for those that want to read Elliot Jacquet, 1987, a well-respected psychologist, if you look at it, he says the working capacity of an individual is a function of cognitive capacity times knowledge, skills, values, wisdom, which is basically personality, and the type of job to be done. And when you're doing these tests, the reason why we end up giving what is called general mental ability test is that because it has been found to predict performance across all roles. So rather than saying, I'm going to test the HR manager, let me go and look at a specific test. We know if they've got the right general mental ability, even if they are just above or 45 percentile, which is the average range, above 45 percentile, they should be able to do HR significantly well. But also remember, even if I go back to this particular table, it doesn't necessarily mean Fadzai cannot do the job. But we are saying if I compare Fadzai, who is working for company X, and compare with him with Albert, who is working for company D, Albert is definitely giving more value than Fadzai, everything else being constant. But you may find, oh, okay, Fadzai has got a very supportive boss. Fadzai has got a very system in the organization, a very good culture, very good teamwork. You may find Fadzai is excelling because the systems are there. Remember, we're holding all the other factors constant. Albert is brilliant, which I assume even in the HR profession here, some of you are brilliant. But you go into an organization, the culture is terrible and toxic. You can't give value. You find your teamwork, they're very jealous and toxic. You can't give value. All those are factors. Or you go into an organization, there are no resources. You can't give value. So all those factors come in and they will affect how you deliver. But generally, psychologists, what they say is, a clever person, even in a constrained environment, they will find a way to add value. And that's what they normally say. Okay, so that's very important, but also important for you to note as we get to the end of this particular presentation is that if you look at role, for those that like competence profiling, this is the guru, this guy. And if you look at him, he says, for you to be able to have knowledge, skills, and attitudes, they all stem from the foundation of abilities, which is the general mental ability, personality, traits, and other characteristics. The competence is the roofing, okay? The competence is the roofing. For example, you will not find someone who has got very high business acumen if they've got poor critical thinking. It's very unlikely. It's very, very unlikely. If someone has got very poor critical thinking and you find them really top-notch in terms of business acumen, analytical skills, and things like that, those things will not happen if that person has got that kind of skill, that kind of skill. So this is the foundation. If you're going to be any skills audit, this is where you start to look and say, do we have the abilities? Do the people have the right personalities? Again, I want to emphasize, you can have a brilliant person, very intelligent, but that person fails because they've got a terrible personality. They are fighting with everyone. They're very aggressive. They're very lazy. All those things can derail someone who has got so much potential to do a job. That's why it's important to look at those. I will not define skills and temperament because those I have already done. So if what tends to happen, then I just wanted to look at this level. This is the level of capacity on your horizontal. Then your vertical, you're looking at the complexity of the role, which we talked about, the level of work complexity. You find we start with 1, that person labeled 1. John's level of role complexity is a 1, and his capacity is a 3, L3, sorry. And his capacity, level of capacity is also a 3, which means the person, you have matched the level of capacity of that party in the individual to the complexity of the role. Then you go to 2. James is at level 5. The role is at level 5. Level 5 is actually CEO level, general manager level. But John's capacity is level 2, which is a foreman level. This is where you find someone struggling. They've got all the qualification and the experience and everything, but you have elevated them basically to the highest level of incompetence. You find John, who is supposed to be the lead of the organization in terms of trust and strategy and opening doors for the organization, is now talking about tea. Is tea ready? Are the doors closed? Who has walked into the gate and things? Because they are not comfortable up there, because they have no capacity for those roles. I'm sure I've met people who demean very senior roles. Say, but this person is supposed to think strategically, but they waste their time in trivial issues and administrative issues. It's just a sign that someone does not have the capacity for the role. Then you come to 3, we call that person Sam. Sam's role is level 2, but his capacity is level 5, almost MD level. You've got a super engine there, a very super engine, in the sense that actually Sam is being underutilized. He's got the capacity for high level roles, but he's at foreman level. Those are the people that you develop into your high flyers, your high stars, high potential individuals. Just to emphasize again on the cognitive capacity. You know, I gave an example last time of cognitive capacity is like engine capacity. We can have a Lexus, a V4 or a V8, and there's Nissan March. Nothing about it. I'm not talking about particularly about the brand, about the engine capacity. A Nissan March that is a 0.5 liter Nissan March. That kind of vehicle, those 2 vehicles, while they all take petrol, which means they cannot drive to Blaawai, they cannot drive to Chegud, they cannot drive to Nyanga, they cannot drive to Kariba. But their capacity to get to Kariba faster is different because of the engine capacity. So when you look at general mental ability, basically what engine size do we have? We could all be HR managers, we could all be HR executives, but we don't have the same capacity. That's the effect of life. We all don't have the same capacity, and it's a fact of life. So when someone is selecting, you are the employer, you are the HR manager, you want to hire someone who has got the capacity for the role. But obviously other factors may come in, and you may not end up doing exactly that. So assessment centers, I will not go, it's a whole topic on its own. If you are doing assessment centers, which last year we did quite a significant number for executives and also CEOs. In an assessment center, there's a role play where trained assessors are actually assessing. You come and do a presentation, there's a presentation, you do a leaders group discussion where you are 10 of you, you get given a task, maybe a budgeting task, and we assess you on the number of skills, your collaboration skills, your teamwork skills and things like that. In basket, it's a typical scenario of a simulation of the role that you are going into. What kind of issues are you going to meet, and how do you do that? Role play, if you are going to be an HR manager, we may give you a very difficult subordinate. How do you handle a difficult subordinate? And we measure you on the number of competence, business acumen, communication, analytical skills, all those skills, we assess them. It will be normally after your psychometric test, you go to assessment centers. If you look at companies like BAT, they do all these kind of things, and many other companies. I do know that if you go to companies like Delta, maybe Delta and the Old Mutual, they've used these because they've got their own resident psychologists, some of them, and some do use us and others to do the assessment. Okay, technical know-how, I have already talked about. Technical job knowledge, we use job knowledge tests. Others use a professional qualification, but most of the time you miss it. It doesn't necessarily mean that someone with a master's degree will be better than someone with a first degree, if the minimum qualification is a first degree. So those are some of the complexities that you can meet. So what profiles did we find? This one is an extra slide. It's supposed to be did. I did this at the Marketers Association of Zimbabwe. They said, we want to just find out how are marketers faring in terms of their capacity when you compare them to other professions. So what I then did this. I looked at, in our database, and looked at 2,574 accounting professionals. I looked at 716 HR professionals. I looked at 332 procurement supply chain. I looked at 933 marketing and sales professionals. And this is how they performed on the number of tests. We start with the critical thinking. You can see for that database, and I think this sample is big enough to give you an overview. You can argue. It's all perfectly fine. Others can do their own research as well. So if you look here, you'll find on critical thinking, when you combine non-STEM professions, accountants tend to perform better on average. This is the average, followed by sales, then followed by HR, then procurement is the last there. Okay, on critical thinking. It could vary depending on another sample, if someone has to do another study, but I think the sample is big enough for us to have a general feel of the results. But remember, this is overall. Normally, we took mid to managers upwards, not clerical staff. With like anything else to do with average, it's affected by outliers. It could then be affected. Then we look at the numerical reasoning. You find accounting professions do very well with an average above 27. HR professional average around 27 to 25. Okay, 25 points something. Okay, then also sales and marketing slightly above HR. Procurement slightly higher, because most of the people who come from procurement, they actually come from accounts and business studies, and the mathematics, numerical reasoning is one of the components. Then you go to abstract reasoning, HR there, then you put procurement, sales and marketing, then accounting there, then personality dimensions. Interestingly, there's something that we call a deception score, which basically looked at, was someone trying to cheat when they were completing their personality test. You can see there, the higher the score, the higher the deception score, the higher someone was trying to cheat. You find procurement people have got the highest today, with sales and marketing having the lowest, if you compare them. Then service orientation, which is called agreeableness and other personality dimensions. We found that accounting professions are highly disagreeable. The low score means they're highly disagreeable, and salespeople. Highly agreeable people are found in procurement, in HR, okay? They're more service-oriented. HR people are more service-oriented than any other profession from a personality point of view, on average. Then conscientiousness, which is basically diligent and getting things done. HR and supply chain, they are organized, they plan their things ahead compared to people in sales and marketing and accounting. Then you go to intellect. Intellect is basically the level of curiosity, how curious someone is. HR tops that, very curious people. and explorative, and accounting and marketing are at the bottom. Then extraversion, with how extroverted people are. You find HR tops, that the sociable people who go into HR, because our personality influences people's choice of careers as well. And it's no surprise that HR people are more outgoing and sociable because their job also requires them to do that. Then accounting and marketing, they've got the lowest in terms of extroversion. They are more reserved people who go into account, more back office kind of stuff. Surprising about marketing, especially in our group. But when I went for Mars, one of the reasons could be that their profession is attracting people who are really not marketing people, people who find, oh, people are making money in marketing, they also come in there, but they're not genuinely marketing people. Then openness to experience, how receptive you are to new ways of doing things. You find HR tops there, accounting, very rigid people. In accounts, they stick to whatever has worked before, and they want to stick to tradition, and salespeople. And then lastly, emotional adjustment. The higher the higher the score in this case, the more emotionally stable you are. And in people, HR people are more emotionally stable compared to people in accounts, and also compared to people in sales. Okay. Basically, that's my presentation to you, colleagues. And I will now talk slightly, shortly, briefly about when you are taking a test. Most people have said, oh, I've had someone calling me and say, look, I want to take a psychometric test. Can I have practice the test? The only thing that you do that will help you when you're going for a psychometric test is to manage your time. Basically, that's the only thing. Remember, we are not testing knowledge, accumulated knowledge. Even if you go and read, the change that you're going to have is slightly going to be very small. It helps, but it's slightly going to be very small. That's why there are psychometric tests, especially the cognitive ability, of what is liability of 0.9, which means the error variance is only about 10%. So the key for psychometric tests, if you know what you're doing, you just need to manage your time. And we always say, if you don't know a question, answer to a question, it will not come no matter how much you look at it. The answer will not come. You don't know. Skip it and go to another question so that you can complete the questions, rather than you just wasting your time. I see a lot of people, they may waste a lot of time trying to overthink over a particular question, but it won't help you. Skip and go to another question. Once you do that, you will find that it's now easier for you to then pass. Because sometimes, for example, you may be doing numerical reasoning, and you waste a lot of time trying to calculate the tests. Just hold on for me. Okay, so that's basically what happens when you are preparing for psychometric tests. Are the other tests more difficult than others? Not necessarily. Remember, the interpretation depends on the norms. For example, you may find that someone writes, a group of people writes numerical reasoning, and after writing numerical reasoning, you find the average is 15 out of 40. And you come there and score 14, you still have done well compared to the norm group, and you are going to score in the 90th percentile. So it's not necessarily about the raw score that you have. But for anyone who takes psychometric tests, the trick is manage your time, skip the question that you don't know, and go to the question. You can come back and try to reason, but most of the time it won't help. If you want to do practice tests, there are plenty of them, including on our Human Capital Hub. We have got some practice tests that you can do. It just helps you to so that you are not nervous, you know what is expected, but it's not going to enhance your knowledge. Although some people say, yes, you can gain marginally when you do the practice. The choice is really yours. You can actually do that. Mr. Jomuya, do you want to summarize any key points before we open this for questions?
Not at the moment.
Okay, thank you.
I think you covered basically the major issues.
Okay, so now let's now look at the questions that people may have. If you have any questions that you may have, you can raise your hand or shoot. Just ask the question. You don't need to raise your hand. We are open to answer any questions that you may have, myself and Mr. Jomuya.
Good afternoon, Memory. Thank you for the presentation and the information. My first question, I think you touched it when you were giving your opening remarks. But maybe to seek clarity, in another platform, we're just discussing with some HR people, and there were, I would say, allegations of saying psychometric testing in Zimbabwe is slightly different when it's done internationally. So the question was to say, do we have local tests or batch of tests that we have manufactured here, or we use international standards? That's the first part of the question. And the second part of the question is to say, in terms of testing the validity, and also how can we say these tests are reliable, because obviously we get sort of different results. Someone might not perform well in psychometrics like you were saying, but is a good performer on the job. So maybe those two questions for now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Let me start with answering your first question on the psychometric tests are done, we use international standards, but the type of tests may differ depending on the use of those tests, okay? Some have gone to a stage where they've validated and shortened the test. Some have gone to a stage where they've extended the test length. But for example, if you go and look at numerical reasoning, no matter where you go, it's the same. The actual questions may actually be different, but they're all the same. We use international standards. So just go to SHL, just go to JVR South Africa, which is, we have partnered with them and we've worked with them and tested some people here using their tests. There's no difference. I've gone to JVR several times myself. There's no difference in the tests, okay? But the difference can come, for example, if you're doing team building and you do the MBTI test, which is a personality test first, and someone gives you a 16 PF, they're different there, but you'll find the results will not be that different. They are tapping exactly into the same issues. Although the MBTI test is normally not used for selection. It's normally used for development, while the other personality tests are used for selection purposes. Just to give you an example, we had a session that we did. We tested about 400 people for a particular organization locally. Someone came and said, I want to see if they get the same results internationally. They went and shopped in the UK. They tested and got exactly the same results. Okay, so the UK guys, because they had local African norms, but if they had used the British norms, the results were going to be different, because they're comparing to a different group. So I don't see any difference between international, what we are calling international tests, because some of the people that are actually in those international organizations, some of them are Zimbabweans who are here, who are actually working for the same organization. Some of the designers of those tests are Zimbabweans. We won't mention them, but we do have someone that we worked with at UZ who has actually designed some of the tests in Zimbabwe. Now, so the effect of saying international or not, but we are not discouraging you. If you feel you get more value from doing internationally, it's okay, fair and fine. You don't necessarily have to use IPC. You don't necessarily have to use any local users. Although the regulations locally say the tests must be customized for local use, basically using Zimbabwean norms, basically using what Mr. Zumuya was talking about, validation of the tests in a local environment, doing construct validation. The question, when you read the question, do they give the same interpretation when you compare to the British? You may find the Zimbabweans are interpreting them differently. So confirmatory effect analysis will tell you this question is out of range. It must be out of this test. We do that with Mr. Zumuya basically every month. When we design some of the tests ourselves and some of the instruments ourselves, and we validate it. Like I said, for those that need to stress as assessment, you can use the 4DSQ instrument that we designed, and it's in the article, and others are already using it. The same article is being cited globally. So that will be my response to the issue of international or not international, or saying they are not reliable. With Mr. Zumuya, before we do anything, the first thing that we do, we test our test periodically. We actually run reliability. We've got 1,000 entries. We run reliability. Most of our tests over 0.9, over 0.8, 0.9 reliability. So why would it be different from international? But again, the issue of preference is okay. You are allowed to use a test from anywhere in the globe as long as it's done by psychologists, but also be very careful, because there are scammers on the internet. I have received several calls. Harrison received several calls. He actually called me at some stage where there's a group of organizations that are calling them international organizations. They'll tell you must have whatever. They give a fancy name of a test You must have this tested. If there's a psychologist there, you can get tested, or you can use our own test. So that those people are driving people to go to have their tests, or they'll say send money through some money transfer. It's a scam. Don't do it. It's a scam. They'll say we are a union or some affiliated organization. Think I've found a job in Mozambique to NGO Uganda. That's a scam. It is a scam that has been running for 6 years. So be careful that you will not be cheated. But we are not dissuading you from taking a test that is international. And if you've taken an international test and you want to share with me or any one of the psychologists, you say, no, I have taken this test. Even before you share with us, you say, look, I've taken a verbal reasoning, a numerical reasoning, and a critical thinking test, and I was compared to other executives in the African context. Can you give me your own test, and I want to see how I perform? You'll find there will be no difference in those results. There won't be any difference. But if I, for example, if I take your results and compare to a Malawi norm group, you may find you're doing very well. If I go and compare you to a Kenyan norm group, you may find you're not doing very well. That's the purpose of norming, because it takes the cultural context into consideration. Okay, what was your second question? I can't remember. I spoke too much, so I missed your second question. Can you come again on your second question?
Okay, I think you've touched briefly on it. It was on the validity. It was linked to the first to say.
Oh, yeah, okay. On the validity one, we actually do lots of validation studies. For those that know, okay, you can go to okay. We did the validation study on the active operator testing process platform that they're using now. You can go there. It's a massive report that we produced. We did a similar one for Old Mutual Malawi. We did a similar one for Benge BC local. We do validation. We do lots of Brands Africa. We did for sales reps. We did the validation project. We do validate, but also let me just be careful. Validation, the challenge with validation is to get credible performance information. Because what you do, you take your test score on one side and correlate them with actual performance data. Either it's a 360 assessment or actual performance rating. Because before we do that, we first of all start by assessing your how reliable your performance ratings are. In the majority of cases, you find the reliability of 0.4, 0.1. It's as good as useless. So we can't use that to validate because it's not a good criterion. Okay. But if you've got credible data, for example, in salespeople, in business development people, and all those tellers and everything, you've got hard facts data. Normally, the validation goes very well. And I want to emphasize again, it doesn't necessarily mean that the person that was ranked number 5 is taken to go and perform and they do well. Remember, it's only cognitive ability only explains 65%. Personality explains a certain portion, job knowledge a certain portion. So it's cognitive ability or psychometric test do not explain 100% variance. It's only one of the tools in your toolbox. It is only one of the tools which you can decide to ignore if it doesn't give you value. All those options are available for HR professionals. We are not saying go and do psychometric tests. No. If they are not giving you value, you're not seeing value, and they've got other means of getting the best employees, by all means do so. Okay.
Okay, sure. Thank you.
Any other question?
Hi, Memo.
Yes, how are you, Farai?
Yes, I'm fine. It's Nube.
Oh, yes.
Right. Yes, I was in and out
from your voice, even if the name was not appearing there.
We've been working together for so long.
Yes,
just my memo is not a question as such. It's an observation that I've been making, which culminated in us equally contributing towards you making this presentation. I'm sorry that I was in and out, so some of the things may have been picked before and I missed them because I was driving, but I listened to the greater part of the presentation at the end. One of the primary challenges I think that we have as HR people, I'm talking to you as an HR person.
That's correct.
We have worked together, I think, for more than 10 years now. You have come to MSU, you have presented public lectures, HR dinners, etc., etc. The reason why there has been a lot of noise in all the groups where you find HR people available is that when companies call for psychometric tests as a choice, right, and part of the recruitment process, The young upcoming HR practitioners have this perception to say we need to enjoy some kind of preference because we have gone through the process of undergoing an HR degree from level 1 up to level 4. And if you rewind 5-7 years back, I came to you, Memo, in person, and I said, Memory, we want to introduce 2 modules at MSU. We want to introduce psychometrics as a module because our students are failing to make it into industry. Why? Because companies require that they undergo psychometrics. And throughout the whole degree process, we don't have anything that is linked to that. So yes, a psychology student who may have done 3 modules, the HR, industrial relations, principles of human resource management, and probably public sector human resource management, can compete with an HR student either the whole degree, HR, and beat the HR students from psychometrics.
Yes.
And together we sat down and we came up with a module, Rema Psychometrics, and we also came up again with a module, Reproductivity. So I want you to appreciate the pain of the HR graduates in all these institutions who have a feeling that in psychologists who are carrying out these psychometrics, you have a certain category of people that you want to promote. And in this case, a psychologist would go for a psychologist. I'll bet the fact that HR, Memo, you are an HR person. That is the reason why you sit in all these HR boards. So I'm very happy your presentation has been able to explain some of the misconceptions that are there in the industry. This is the reason why you find out that our young boys, and I'm happy they are in here, we're beginning to feel like, okay, can we go international? Why? Because they've got a feeling that IPC, just an example, for an example, Nkui and his colleagues are promoting psychologists in order for them to occupy. Let me give you an example. At one point, Econet, Yakanga in about 7 HR guys. Out of the 7 HR guys, only one, it's Malone, if I'm not mistaken, he had a pure HR degree. The rest were psychologists. And if you go into different companies in Zimbabwe and take my samples, you are going to discover that the majority are psychologists. So we have been talking and explaining to our young ones to say, HR aina monopoly in the industry. Anyone can be an HR person because there are different ways we use to be where we are today. So I'm sure these are some of the concerns that we have been able to explain in order for people to understand. So I'm very happy on that one. And I'm sure from today going onwards, we don't want to see as if there is war between universities and IPC and other psychology companies. We don't want war between universities and IPMZ. What we want is collaboration for the betterment of the profession.
Yeah,
thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Farai, for that. I think you are good testimony in terms of how I have worked with you before. We have never had a problem with you before. And wherever you call me to come to MSU, I have come. In some cases, I have canceled whatever I was doing to support the department. So just to give you a bit of history, Farah, you notice that me as this organization, IPC as an organization, I actually employ more HR people or background than psychologists myself, okay, from different universities. I've got fewer people who have done psychology than other degrees, for the simple reason that I don't really care whether someone's got psychology or not, except for one. For example, someone comes, I hire someone, says, even the people that I hire from psychology, and say, look, if you want to be a psychologist, I can help you to as your supervisor for internship. Some don't do it, some do it, some end up leaving without doing it, okay? So that's the only component when someone says, look, I want to register. I even supervise people who are not here, who work elsewhere. to be psychologists. So the demarcation between psychology and whatever, we are all doing the same thing. We are all in the same, trying to help organizations. I have never looked at it and say, I want to promote this. Just for any information, Farah, for example, the Econet example that you were given, I've never done testing for Econet ever, not even one day in the terms of their psychometric test. They actually probably use the international or other people. I've never done testing for them. So even those people that out of those 9 or whatever, I don't know them. I've never interacted with them. I don't do work for Econet, as an example. So these are issues that people, misconceptions that are out there. We are there to, if you look back even at IPMZ as an example, traditionally there was no HR degree. So you find people from sociology, Pollard, psychology, even business studies going there, okay? If I was talking to Rose, for example, Rose Namo, a colleague of mine, a business partner for that matter. Rose has got a background in business studies. She didn't do HR degree, but she was president of IPMZ. Okay. So where it matters most, especially if you look at the HR profession, is to say, let's get to a stage where we can standardize for someone to practice as an HR practitioner. What are they required to do? This is why precisely you find that HR people have been able to go and do law and practice as lawyers and get registered as lawyers, because that's allowed. That's the freedom of the people that is available. The same applies. If any one of you guys want to go and start psychology, although the process is strenuous, any one of you can end up actually being a psychologist in a few years' time, especially for the youngsters. You can actually do your HR degree, you still practice HR, you want to also go and do psychology, you can actually do that. We can actually help you to do that. I've even volunteered to mentor some people and give them guidance in terms of how that can be done. I'm open. I've done sessions here, weekends, my own time to help other people to come and do that. When I look at colleagues in the industry, I don't look at them as having done HR or psychology or Pollard. I've never looked at that. But let me also explain. You are right, there are people who are in their own organization. This is Farai running his own organization, Banana Plantation Organization. Farai says, I know I came from MSU. If you can give, when you are shortlisting, not psychometric test, but when you are doing a shortlisting, please get me people from MSU. At that stage, me as a consultant, I have no power because I get paid on the basis of placement. So Farai goes to company D and says, can I have CVs for HR graduate trainees? I need people from MSU. He goes again to watch a company and say, I need people from it. So 5 consulting companies submit to Farai. Farai can choose the best out of those. The same is that institution bias has happened. UZ, there are some people who have done UZ who prefer UZ graduate. There are some people who have gone NAST who prefer NAST graduate. In actual fact, that practice is actually done by HR guys who are in this particular meeting. They've got their own preferences. There are some people who will tell you when you're shortlisting for an accountant, please don't bring anyone who has worked for a parastatal. I don't want them. I want blue chip companies. It's your choice. Those are the choices that people make. But when then it comes into the public domain, it would appear the consultant are the ones doing it. But what I can assure you from a psychometric test review, there is no way, you can ask me, there's no way I will tamper with the psychometric test result. I can actually even ask someone to come here without notice, ask someone to extract your raw scores and give Mr. Jumuya to interpret. He will interpret and you come up with the same answer. Or take your raw scores and take them to another psychologist, they will interpret the same answer. And we're actually prepared. If there's anyone who thinks they've failed or they've been failed, we can test you for free. And to go to another psychologist, I will pay to get tested for free. Or an international one, I actually pay for you to get tested for free and you bring your results unchanged and say, let's compare the results. If the person has used the local norms, the results will be the same. If the person has used a different norm from another country, the results will be slightly different, but not huge differences. Okay, that's normally what happens. So we are open. We want to support every HR graduate, and we encourage, especially if we advertise for jobs, we encourage those HR graduates to apply to IPC. Farai would know there are good people that came from MSU who have passed through my hands here that I have trained. It's one stage, I had no single graduate from with psychology background. I had people from Africa University. MSU was probably with the highest number. Recently, we've also started taking from NAST. I had people from Bindura University as long as 7 years back. Coming here with an HR background. So that's a bit of my background. So if there's any misconception out there, and people are spreading that misconception, is basically a wrong misconception. There are people who don't know me, the way I do my work. I don't tamper with the integrity on anything. You can check my record on anything. Whether it's working for a board or working, just check my history, wherever I've gone. I don't do that. I tell people the truth, but some of the time that truth is not very pleasant, but that's who I am. I will not hide the truth, and I will not shy to tell you the truth. Even if you're wrong, I will tell you, then we shake hands afterwards. That's basically how we work. And I can, other psychologists can testify. I've worked with Mr. Zumuya, my lecturer, and he has actually done quality control for the work that I've done. Even now as a psychologist, he has done that quality control himself. Okay. Any other question?
Thank you very much, Mr. Ngui. If I can also come in, please.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you. You can come in.
Thank you very much. Firstly, I would like to thank you, Mr. Ngui, for our call for this kind of discussion. We really thank you for the presentation. I think my colleagues, I'm speaking from an HR background. I'm also with Dr. Anude at Midlands State University there. But just a quick question. Psychometric test, should we administer it before the interviews or after the interviews? Given the contribution that you say the psychometric test makes towards the selection of the best candidates, should we administer it before the interviews or after the interviews? And I'm also saying this in the context that when we start with the interview in itself is also a selection process in which some of the candidates are dropped out and then certain candidates are then referred for psychometric tests. What would be your advice to the corporate world and to this profession of HR? Thank you.
Okay. The standard that is recommended, even if you go to Society of Industrial and Organizational Psychology, which is our benchmark, they always say, because after shortlisting, you do psychometric tests because the numbers are huge, or you've got huge numbers. That is the recommended. And they also say when you're doing your selection, you must start with the most predictive selection tool so that you don't unnecessarily drop out people who may actually be good. For example, if you go, let's say, I'll give you an example, Brian. You go for an interview for HR director and you are 10 of you. And the guys who are doing the interview are using a very unstructured interview, ask them about useless things that have nothing to do with the job. Not a single, probably one or two questions about HR. Then the other question, where do you come from? Oh, you come from Reo. So you come from Jimba. So you're related to Mugabe. So questions like that. Okay? At the end of the day, they say, oh, okay, we are left with 3 people. Johnson & Johnson, Gilbert, and Mercy. Those are the ones going for psychometric tests. They bring them, all of them can fail. Okay? Or one can pass. You understand? That's what has normally happened. This is why you do the interview, bring them. We have had cases where all of them have failed. The people failed. Even the people that I have given them to say, if I'm doing a project where I say, okay, I'm giving you this candidate, these are the people that you have shortlisted, we think they qualify. The HR manager in the organization, I can give them 10 CV. They can say, oh, no, I want these 6. Let me interview them first. They interview them, they can come and pass, maybe all of them, or 2 of them, or sometimes all of them, even if it's vice versa. But if you really feel your interviews are really structured, remember the difference between psychometric tests and interviews is very small if you're doing structured interviews. It's like in psychology terms, it's huge, because it's 48 versus 65. We are saying you can equally select very good candidates, extremely good candidates, if you use structured interviews without necessarily even doing psychometric tests. You can actually select good candidates. It's possible. So you can do vice versa. If your interview process is really structured, and the structured interview, you use design your questions based on the job descriptions. The questions are asked in a standardized way. The questions are scored in a standardized way. You can start with the interview and bring the people for psychometric tests. You can still do that and still get value out of it. But if you are using an unstructured interview, it's better to start with the psychometric test, then go to the interview. I hope I answered you, Brian.
Exactly. Thank you very much. Well answered.
Thank you, Farai. I see Farai Mugabe got a question.
Yeah, Mr. Ngu, thank you very much for your presentation. I think we once had a conversation on this, and I thank you very much for that. And also, one of the reasons why I chose to be in HR, because you once came to our university while I was still a student, and you presented on the balance scorecard. I still remember that. Yes. So mine is more of I have comments, and then I have a last question at the end. The first issue is on the entry into psychology. You find that if you go to South Africa, you go to Wits University, And a person with an undergraduate degree in human resource management is allowed to do a master's in psychology, in organizational psychology, provided that they go for an honors degree in probably industrial psychology. You go to Northwest University in South Africa, it's also the same. Someone with the BSc honors in human resource management is also allowed to do a master's degree in psychology. The same with the University of Pretoria and the same with the University of Johannesburg and even UNISA. So you find that most of the modules that people in HR do are similar to those that are done in psychology in some aspects. And you find that in Zimbabwe, there is a bit of a belief that there is a bit of a gatekeeping where you've got to have a first degree in psychology and you have a master's degree and an internship. Instead, it's about 7 years, which is one of the reasons why you find that people have done other degrees which are not psychology are now saying, okay, fine. If this is the entry that we're finding in Zimbabwe for psychology, why is it that in HR we're allowing this to happen, whereby a person who's done a degree in psychology can say, I can even actually come and practice HR, or someone probably just do a diploma in PMZ. So is that because we are in a global village where we see what is happening in other countries, and then we try to localize that to what is happening in Zimbabwe? So that is one of the biggest cause of concern to say that in other countries, this is not the same. And we understand that Zimbabwe benchmarks with South Africa, but in Zimbabwe, there are differences in terms of that. That is a cause of concern. I'll just pause it there. I'll go to, let me just pause there. I will answer at the end. And I don't want to waste people's time by.
Okay, thank you. That's fine.
We go to the issue about reports, psychometric test reports. We understand that psychometric test reports, they are sensitive information that might not be available to candidates because probably if they are not properly administered, they might harm the person's terms of confidence in terms of in their entire life. You've seen various issues like the one that I usually normally share with people of a case in Philippines where a report was shared about psychometric and it was actually harmful, and even the psychology association, they actually spoke to say it was not good. But we believe that the reports or psychometric test reports give a person's ability to understand themselves and know themselves better and know which areas they need to develop better. For example, if I do a psychometric test on numerical reasoning and then I realize that I'm solving low in numerical reasoning, it means that I need to develop more in terms of numerical reasoning. If I realize that probably I'm low on verbal reasoning, I then need to develop more in terms of verbal reasoning. But those reports, they're not given to candidates, even just a candidate report for them to fully understand themselves. What happens next is that the interviewers or even the psychologists or what, they just keep quiet. So that lack of communication then it brings a lot of misconceptions that you find in industry to say, what's really happening? If I go to the doctor, they will tell me that probably you're suffering of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you don't have an issue in terms of this health condition or what. They still have got a report that they keep to themselves. But locally in Zimbabwe, you don't receive that report.
Okay.
Lastly, I'll talk on, let me just the last one, the last comment, then I finish. Lastly, I'll talk about on the issue about the international suppliers, particularly with the issue about metal from India. Metal costs $12. And metal has been more reliable. I've been using metal, I think, since 2015, 2016 there. It gives you the reliable information and the reliable results that are there. Probably the issue about norms can be an issue, but those guys that are international accredited. And they also even validate their own results based on them. So you then find out to say that if you are going to get more value at metal, which then give you probably the report that you require, which also allows you to give feedback to the employee, is it not better to use an international platform rather than a local platform, which is more expensive, probably costing $100 and probably not giving enough reports and probably not giving everything that is there? Because I've heard some other countries who say, if it's a local supplier in terms of interviews, I will not go for psychometric tests because of all these misconceptions that I find today.
Okay.
Thank you, Ms. Andrew. That's my comment.
Thank you very much, Farai, for raising those valid points. I'll start with the issue of the degree, the gatekeeping, and things like that. Let me tell you a story. When I did my first degree, I was very curious to be a registered psychologist long back, 97, when I finished. And I joined the Zimbabwe Psychological Association. At that time, it has very few Black people in there. That whole organization was predominantly white people, including the people who crafted the Psychological Practice Act that time, they were predominantly white people. At some stage, there was a big fight between the black psychologists and the white people because they thought it was a preserve of the white. I went through all that because I was a member of that, and I struggled with the first degree, and I was really curious. I wanted to be a psychologist. When the occupational diploma in occupational psychology was introduced, what was an equivalent of a master's, I went on to it and passed that degree, then got registered to practice. After that, they then introduced the master's degree. What I see as the problem is, maybe the first point is, it may be necessary to engage Zimbabwe Psychological Association, who are obviously our lobbyists in terms of what must happen. Because normally what has happened is that most of these, the regulator, because currently we are regulated under the Ministry of Health, and sometimes just understanding the things is difficult. But when the whites were there, they put in a framework in terms of what are the requirements for someone to start to be a psychologist. Because, for example, if I look at Face Value, I don't see anyone. For example, you look at MSU, the psychology degree and an HR degree, and it's very clear up front. They say if you want to be able to then enroll for an honors degree in psychology, then you do a master's degree in psychology. You need to have it done 4 modules of psychology as an example. That can be done. But what is required for that to happen is, I think, collaboration between Zimbabwe Psychological Association, the regulator, and ZimChe, so that whatever, and the university, in actual fact, this can be done easily by the universities. If there's any university that is like MSU, I'm sure you've got a very big, a very good relation between HR department and psychology department. If you can work together and say, we want to be able to, for our students to be able to branch out and decide whether they want to be a psychologist, or to want to be HR, or to want to be both. But for them to be able to do that, these are the modules. For example, someone in psychology may say, you know what, I'm doing psychology, but what I wanted to do is HR, pure HR. These are the modules that you need to have. That can actually happen, but because of political issues and tough wars between universities and departments, it's going to be a mammoth task for that to happen. Because these things, the practice of psychology is already enshrined in the statutes. Unless the trainers, the people who develop these people agree themselves what needs to happen, it's going to be very tough. But I think it's a very good proposition that can be done. And because I'm in the council, I'm sure there are council members in here in this particular presentation from the Zimbabwe Psychological Association. I think it's a proposition that can be taken on board from the ZPA, then lobby the regulator. But I think it needs to start with one university that is willing to experiment with that. That one university must engage, and the practitioners must engage the Zimbabwe Psychological Association. That can be done easily, I think, including the moderation. Just for your information, there have been an outcry as well from students in psychology who are saying, the process is long and everything. But people have been adamant and say, look, that's the practice elsewhere in terms of the process for someone to get qualified as a psychologist. But it's a very valid point that you raise. And I don't feel gatekeeping must be done when someone wants to do a program. We must make it easy for someone to then go into the program as long as they've got the capacity to do that. So that can be done. But maybe we need to organize another engagement where we bring the ZPA people, president and others, and other occupational psychologists. Then we put our heads together. How HR people are doing study. Maybe we could use even MSU as a starting point. MSU, the regulator, and then this association can come together, engage ZimChe, and say what kind of degree program or modules should be mandatory in both programs for someone then to be able to branch and be able to end up being enrolled in a master's program in psychology or an honors program, because we don't have an honors after a general degree. We don't have an honors. The starting degree is an honors degree. Then the issue of communicating the reports. You know what? In actual fact, all the practice say when you write a test, you can request to get feedback. I do give feedback. I can tell you some of the clients where I've tested more than 400 people a year. I do give feedback. When I did in Malawi, I had to give feedback to more than 400 people with the help of Mr. Zumuya. When I did another client again, I had to do feedback for more than 200. I do give feedback. If there's anyone who has taken IPC psychometric test, I can give you feedback anytime. As long as I'm free with schedule, you can come to the office. I take you through your report. The reason why most of the guidelines are discouraging psychologists from issuing a report direct, especially for if someone was taking the report for purpose of employment. The reason is that most employers are the custodian, because they send you, they pay their money, the report is theirs. So they don't want their employee, if they hire you, they don't want their employees to start getting feedback. This is why, for example, if you take a psychometric test under IPC, we don't give you feedback until you have finished the interview process with the employer, because we don't want to go ahead of a process that an employer is pushing. Because we can say, okay, Farah, you did this in this particular test and you did very well. Then you go, the employer may not want you there. Then the employer say, why did you give them feedback? We know they did well, but we don't prefer them. Those are issues that we encounter. But for purpose of feedback, giving feedback, general feedback, I actually give you feedback, reports, go through the whole report with you, and our reports actually indicate these are the development areas. I actually take you through those reports. Where I feel you are mature enough to be able to handle the report without specifically damaging your self-esteem or getting overexcited because you've done very well and probably affect your performance in the future, I actually give the report. And I only give the report after giving the feedback, and I don't think it's only fair. Then on the issue of international suppliers, you said you've been using them from India. For me, as long as you're happy with them and their profession, what they're giving you, it's fair and fine. The reason why, because if you look at some of the suppliers, they've got a whole team of people who are developing tests, proprietary tests, and things like that, to such an extent that you end up with very cheaper tests. But for some of us, for some locally, developing tests becomes extremely expensive because of the process that you have to go through in order to develop that test. But also you'll find the tests are going to be cheaper as more registered psychologists come on board and start administering these tests. Basically, issue of supply and demand will come on board. The issue of whether the tests are reliable or not, for me, as long as if you're using people from India, from South Africa, and they are happy with the output that they're giving, please go ahead, and it's actually fair, it's good practice in terms of getting those tests and the value that you get there. But if you generally compare ourselves in South Africa, we're actually very cheap when you compare South Africa. In South Africa, it's a bit cheaper. UK, it's an arm and leg for you to get a test. And in some cases, some of the American companies also very expensive. But there are some that have developed shorter tests. There are some of them you can actually get a test for $5, you can get a test for $15 and things like that. All those are possibilities. But as long as you are at Farai and any others with an international supplier, you can get the Forex to pay them and things like that. It's all fair and fine. That's an issue. But what has happened also with the regulator, I don't know, Mr. Zumuya, if you are still in the Education Committee of the Allied Health Professions Council, the regulator may move again, which has not been pushed by any of us. I rarely interact with the regulator to say if someone is going to practice and test people here, they need to have a local practicing certificate. The same way if I go to Malawi, I need to go here and have my practicing certificate, have a temporary practicing certificate so that I can test Zimbabweans. But the regulator ultimately is saying, we are the custodian of the law and we are ultimately responsible for that. To such an extent that we have had people who come from other countries and come here and want to test people, and some of them getting arrested because they are, for example, people in ZPA who are actually in charge of professional standards. There are some people in the Allied Health Professions Council who are looking for people who are not registered, who are practicing. What they do is just take the police and bring the police to you, to wherever you are, and get picked up. And it's not necessary for someone to spend a day in Mishtok because they've not followed the procedure. But so far, from what you have said, I don't see anything that is amiss, and it's perfectly fine. And if you have got anyone who is complaining that they've not been given feedback when they want feedback from us, especially from me, I'm available. I've even given feedback from people who have taken the test here, then migrated to South Africa. The company has got Zimbabwe that they want to post outside the country. I've done that via Zoom. I do that a lot, almost on a daily basis. I do give feedback. Mr. Zumuya, do you want to say anything in relation to the question that Farai had asked?
Just to add on the first question or comment that he made, in terms of correspondence or equivalence between South African degrees and Zimbabwean psychology degrees. I think here we have a minimum body of knowledge, which we worked together between ZIMTE, the universities, and I think Allied Health had some input into that. So if you did a general degree, or somebody does a general degree in South Africa, maybe HR, and has got certain modules that relate to psychology, the thing that we recommend, which no university will stop you from doing, is to add on those modules that are missing in your degree program to make it a fully psychological degree program via what we call a special honors degree. After that, you are as good as any other psychology graduate here. So that is one route that one can take.
Yeah.
Then I think it's the last one where you're using metal. The question that arises from your use of those tests relates back again to the norms that we were talking about. How relevant are the tests within the local context? To what extent have you established their validity, as we spoke earlier at the beginning? Because at the core of psychometrics are the issues of reliability and validity. There will not be any question, perhaps, on the reliability, but on the validity aspect, there may be questions to be asked. Is the test predicting performance within that particular local context? There lies the difference, because when they validated that instrument, they validated it in a certain culture. So in our case, does that test predict performance in our own local context? The answer may be yes or no. And that is what needs to be established, so that you do not give wrong interpretation to how well a person can perform on the job. So you find all jurisdictions, whether a test has been developed in Australia, in the UK, and has to be applied to, say, New Zealand or America, they go through the process of cross-validation. So when you look at all these tests, you will always find validation studies of the same test in each different country. Unless Metro has had sufficient sample size to validate that for those tests, then the validity of the tests or instruments would be in question. And therein comes the regulatory authority. To what extent are you using a valid test? Because that is the requirement a psychologist should establish before applying the instrument. So that's my bit in terms of contribution. So do it with caution.
Okay.
When you do it, what we're saying is you cannot just rely on the test result. You have to use other information to support your claim to the validity of that test.
Thank you, Mr. Zhumuya. I think you were lucky to be on the the committee that was looking at the review of the degree programs. For Farai from MSU, I think one of the tricky point that we could do in terms of addressing some of the gaps for those students that want to then go into psychology, the quickest would be for them to have a special honors. If you can motivate for a special honors, for that will then take anyone who has done, for example, HR, and they want to branch into psychology or have still do HR, but also be a registered psychologist. A special honors will be the best way. If MSU can do that, I'm sure most universities will do a 1 year special honors, and that 1 year normally it's roughly about 8 months. Special honors where you then do the modules. After that, you go to your master's. After that internship, you are done. Those are some of the options. But with more engagement, I think we can find lots of synergies, and we can find each other in terms of how we can help each other. Even in Open Forum, if COVID was to go away, I would really love to bring all the people together, IPMZ, because there's also people who have issues to do with to IPMZ and other things that are there. So let's engage. The best way is engage. We can find a solution. I tell you, the journey that we went through for me to be registered, for me to be where I am, was tough given that environment that I started in when I finished my first degree, and predominantly that this profession was really with white people or only. Even the ZPA executive, you would never get in there. It was not. And the whole full council, you find that it's only white people who will be in the periphery. But we soldiered on until we resuscitated ZPA as a black-owned organization. And I'm sure you can do the same with many of these associations. Let's find what do we want them to do, and they must serve the people. Okay, any other question?
Okay, thanks, Memory. Just a burning one for you again. Okay, from an HR background, maybe what would be your advice in terms of taking these psychometric tests? Okay, talking from personal experience, I've been using these psychometric tests for long now. Although I'm not a pure psychologist, I'm a pure HR person. And obviously, I've been analyzing results, different feedback from those tests. Over time, you end up having a certain mindset because of maybe say what you are looking for in an organization. Actually, I also worked for an organization where we would do cycles for starting from GT level upwards, everyone. It was mandatory. So you analyze those reports and get to select individuals or candidates based on what you have in terms of organizational context. So apparently, it's been long since I took myself a psychometric test. But the last time I took one, I felt like my mind was a bit biased in terms of, okay, the background that I have and how we have been analyzing these results. So what would be your advice maybe to practitioners, HR practitioners, those in the field and those upcoming? What kind of mindset, how can they prepare if they are to take these cycles?
Okay, I'll answer it in two parts. The first part is, if you are going to take a psychometric test, just go there open-minded. Don't worry, don't put yourself under pressure because the norm group is the one that is going to determine whether you're going to do well or not. But also you don't know, like I indicated, who else is taking the test, how competitive are they? You could be competing with one of the best people in HR or one of the top minds in HR. As we know, even from your own experience in class, I think there were people that say, this one. So those are some of the things. So it's not really about failing. It's really about opportunity. So if you get a psychometric test and go to interview, unfortunately, even if you pass the psychometric test and go to an interview, if the interview is not structured, you may get there and find, this is a terrible interview. The people that are doing this, this is not an interview. Again, remember, unstructured interviews are the most common in this country, and that's where most people lose it. There are good people who get lost at the interview level because it then happens that or someone knows they've already a candidate that they want, it's already set. They want that person, and that's the problem. So my advice to anyone is, if you want to take the test, go there fresh and do it without pressure. And if there's anyone sitting here who would want to take the test at no cost at all, as long as you've attended this, I can actually do an assessment for you, give you feedback in a friendly environment, tell you which areas you may need to work on, and also ask you, were there any challenges? Because you also don't want someone to take a test when they are sick or in a very bad environment where they've been distracted, because their scores are not a true reflection of their true ability if you do that. On the last part, there is also something that you can do. Let's say you've been doing this psychometric test for a very long time. You must then check and say, the people that we've been selecting, let's say graduate trainees, are they really coming in to be high flyers? Most of the time, for example, I went through 3 psychometric tests when I went to join the BHP, when I joined Barclays. I first joined Barclays as a trainee, went through psychometric tests and assessment centers. Then I joined BHP, I went through psychometric tests. What you must do is then to say, the people that went through that process as graduate trainees, both graduate trainees are a feeder into executive management. The people who have gone through that process end up being really in the executive, doing well in the executive position. If that's the case, you may actually end up setting a cutoff score and say, if it's in organization, if someone scores in this particular test at this level, we take them. If they score below this, we don't take them. Even if the psychometric test say, look, the person has scored 45%, you may find that in our case, even in 35% in this test, they do well. It's all up to you to take that as long as you're happy as an organization in terms of the value that you are seeing. But don't put yourself under pressure when you go in the mindset. Just go there and say, I don't fail or pass psychometric test. I may be outcompeted by someone else, but I don't really fail. That's a mindset that I want you to take. It's really about being competitive. There are people who may be better than you in the group. The same way you go to an interview, you do extremely well, but there's just one person who has done better than you. Right or wrong, in some cases, because in some interviews, it's not really about doing well. They've got their own preference and those things like that. So my answer is don't put yourself under pressure. Go and enjoy yourself. Whether they tell you to have been selected or not. And don't take not being selected for an interview as a sign of having failed psychometric test. That's not true, as I showed you in that particular diagram. It just means there are people who have done better than you in that particular grouping. That's exactly what it means. Okay.
Yeah, sure. Okay, thank
Any
you.
other question?
Yeah, thanks, Memory. Mine is more of a comment.
Yes.
In the recruitment industry, I'm looking at the issue about governance.
Yes.
I understand that psychologists are also ethical people, but from a governance point of view, we need to ensure that we remove potential sources of misgovernance that can come in or risk in terms of that. Like I pointed out even on the platforms to say that if you place a candidate in most positions in the country, you get more money. And we know naturally from Pavlov or naturally from psychologists, from Maslow, psychologists, people are motivated by money. So is it not possible for us to say, if it's going through Psychology Association, to say that if someone is going to be doing recruitment services or placing a candidate, they don't need to be placing they don't need to be doing psychometric tests for that particular position or totally. So that we separate potential sources of misconceptions or potential sources or chances of people are likely to be being mischievous or what, because we all want money, business. We all want money, our own business. And very few people are ethical sometimes, or we are all ethical, but if we get a situation to become unethical.
Yeah, it's a very good point, Farai. It's a very, very good point. We have done that in some cases where we do give CVs, and the client will say, why don't you send them to another psychologist for psychometric tests? And for me, I'm very happy to do that. If there's anyone here who says, I've given you recruitment and I don't want you to test the same people, we are happy. Or you do vice versa. You go and look for another agent that gives you CV, you send the people for psychometric tests. I'm happy with that. And that can be pushed. And to me, it really doesn't affect in terms of how we practice. But like you said, there are some people who are unethical. But if you check my record, where I come from myself, my record, there may be misconceptions out there, but I don't do that kind of stuff. And I've encouraged, even I've stopped, for example, I've stopped the few clients where I was doing recruitment and the client want to cheat in the process, and I've canceled the contract that would be worth millions of dollars. I've done that not once, several times. And those clients don't want to see me anymore. And I say, it's fine. You can proceed and do your shenanigans on your own. But it's a very valid point which we can raise. But these are things that we can also discuss even in other forums. Say, look, maybe even in the Labor Act, because the employment agents are covered in the Labor Act, to say, okay, if you provide psychometric services, maybe you don't need to provide the same for the same group, or if you provide CVs, you don't need to test the same people. But I know that there are some colleagues of mine that I trust very well, and in terms of being ethical. But it's a valid point that you are raising, Farai. Okay, any other question? I think we have, I'll just give an extra 5 minutes, then we end. We've been on this for a very long 11, now it's 1 o'clock. Yeah. I think there's a Jacqueline, you're saying a person is employed, they are experiencing many job-related challenges. How can a psychometric test assist such as person determine if they're possibly not GMA matched to the job? In this case, is the individual seeking testing while the company is not involved in the process? Yeah, remember, there are some people who can come for testing on their own if they want to see what are the areas of strength, what are the areas of weakness that they may want to work on, you can do that. But some cases, a person may not perform, not because they have no capacity, but because they just being badly managed. Those are some of the factors. The culture is toxic, the culture, the environment, the leader is bad. So it's not only psychometric tests or GMA that determines performance. So So even before you rush to say, this person, I think you need to test them if they are already in your organization. May need to see if we looked at all the other factors that affect performance, remuneration, the environment, the culture in the organization, the person who manages them, and the job knowledge, they have the right job knowledge. Those are factors that you can look at in order to address those issues.
Also, maybe coming in memory and
Yes.
maybe addressing another question raised on the platform to say, can you do psychometrics for someone already in the organization? You can respond on that, but I will also give personal experience from an organization where I am. We actually do psychometrics for individuals already in the organization as part of our talent management exercise. So once we identify and we rate somebody after the performance assessments and is earmarked for the talent management pool, they can go for psychometrics. And from that information, we can assess areas of development and come up with those PIPs and the like. But maybe we can shed more light.
That's very correct. There's a lot of comments doing that. For those that attended the session that was addressed by Joe Mtizwa, IPMZ session that was addressed by Joe Mtizwa and Manyakara, they did allude to that as part of their talent development. They pull together for current employee, they do psychometric tests, they do 360-degree assessment, they do interviews for people who are already in the organization, because it depends on what they're assessing and what they want to develop. So you can actually do that from 2 points. One is career development. One is just to assess capacity. For example, you may find that the person is really qualified. The papers are there they do have the papers, they've got the experience and the exposure that is necessary for someone to perform, but they still don't perform. After you've checked all the environmental factors and find we've done everything, we've tried to support the person, they're still not performing, you may want to check, is it a personality issue? Is it a GMA capacity issue? All those things can still be done as part of your talent development program. And most of the international companies do that. Okay. If there are no questions, guys, I want to thank you so much. And thank you, Farai, for prompting this. Remember our engagement on LinkedIn. I'm very happy that you have organized this so that we can, let's continue the engagement. If you've got any questions, let's continue the discussion. Engage me either in the groups that we are in or privately. I'm happy to engage all of you. I'm also happy to bring other psychologists, whether local or international. I can actually bring some of them to talk about their own experience in South Africa. And I was working on a project with 2 other psychologists, one from Hungary and another one from the US, and the third one from Trinidad and Tobago, and one from Singapore, and a very big project for an international company. And those I can bring them to talk about any issue that you want or share their experience. I can bring them on board and to share their own experience. Otherwise, enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you very much. Let's continue engaging not only on psychometric tests. I'm sure there are many other topics that way we can share experiences and be able to enrich our knowledge as we develop the profession. Thank you.